Hi friends, it's Terry Stewart, Independent Stampin' Up Demonstrator. Welcome to my Stamping is Fun channel and this month's vlog, which is stationery and storage. So my project is a stationery project that also comes with a storage option. So let's get started. So my stationery part of my project are these two cards featuring the art gallery stamp set and the floral gallery dies. And I've used just the stamp set on this card. And this is a happy birthday card, but my idea is to, for my stationery, is to have two of each of these cards, where this one says, thank you. I'll make one just like that, but with a thinking of you or sympathy. And then with this card, I would make another one that wishes a get well sentiment. So you'll have 4 cards with 4 different occasions to use them. I'll be showing you how to make decorate a storage box in the acetate box. So for the first card, we're going to start with this one. So let me get set up for that. For this card, I'm using basic white cardstock for both the card base and for the stamping. And I have a piece, 2 scraps that I'll be using to stamp the flower and the stem. And the DSP is from the Expressions in Ink DSP pack. I just love the colors, the gold foiling in this. It's just amazing, amazing paper. Just fabulous. And I'll be using this pattern. It was really difficult to pick a pattern because they're all so lovely from that Expressions in Ink. But I felt the pale papaya with the pear pizzazz and this little bit of gold was just what I wanted on the front of my card. I'm going to bring in my paper trimmer, and for my card, because you're going to be making 2 cards, I would score this at 5. Four 4¼ inches, and for my metric friends, that would be 10½ centimeters. And this way I come out with 2 card bases. Now my DSP, I'm going to cut 1 3/4 inches. And make this at 5½. And that's my piece there. Now I'm going to stamp the floral image and the stem and leaf. Color combination I'm using for my flower is pale papaya and calypso coral, and then my stem will be in pear pizzazz, and the words will be using the Memento Tuxedo Black. So the flower is a 2-step stamp with a background that's in a lighter color and highlights that you typically stamp with a darker color or the same color ink to give it some depth. So for my project, for the highlights, I'm using Calypso Coral, and for the flower background, I'll be using Pale Papaya. I found that it's easier to line the stamp up, even though it is a photopolymer, you can see through it. It's easiest to ink the shaded darker elements, stamp those first, and then come in with your background, your lighter ink. And there's a couple places where you can look through. I typically look down here on the left, bottom left, and the top center. And by lining those images up over the dark color I can stamp them together. And even if you're off by a little bit, this is a very artsy set, so it would still work. Now this scrap piece of paper seems to have enough room for the Pear Pizzazz stem and leaf, so I'm going to stamp it on this piece of scrap. And here are my floral gallery dies, the coordinating dies for these stamped images. Now, both of these dies will not, I've stamped this too close together, so I'm going to have to run this through twice. So first I'll line up my flower image, the die for that, cut that out, and then come back in with my flower stem. Now that my flower image and my stem leaves are cut out, I'm going to be putting some dimensionals on these so they can be popped up on the front of the card. So these are now ready for the front. My sample card opens on the left with the fold at the left-hand side, opens on the right with the fold on the left. The card that I'm making today has the fold at the top. I just thought that this would add a variety to the pack of cards in my stationery pack. Now the next thing I want to do is stamp my sentiment. I'm going to be using the Inspired Thoughts, and this is going to be a sympathy card, so with heartfelt sympathy. I'll put it onto a block. I'm going to stamp this sentiment on the lower right-hand corner. And now the stamping is done for this card. I'm going to bring in my piece of DSP, and I'm going to offset that a little bit from the left just to add some visual interest. And then my flower will be placed very much in the center of the card. Using my liquid glue, I will adhere this to the card front. And then bring our flower and stem in. And I'm using this leaf to hide the edge of the DSP. I think I might want this a little bit lower because I do want to put some rhinestones. So I will remove the backs of the dimensionals from the leaf and place that up there. And now we can remove these dimensional covers from the floral image. And place that right at the top of the stem. So there we have this lovely card. And I do want to add a bit of bling. Using my champagne rhinestones for this, I think the color coordinates nicely with the pale papaya. Bring my pick a tool to pick them up. And I'm using these little ones. And put one to the top, one over here, lower onto the side, and the final one down my sympathy. So this is the second card that will go in my stationery set. So the other design in my stationery set is this one, almost like to me, it's like a garden bouquet of flowers. And while this one says happy birthday, The next card I want to make will feature the flowers from the art gallery, but I'm going to be using the sentiment, sending healing thoughts your way, as a get well card. Bringing in my paper trimmer, the card base is with Highland Heather, and I'm going to score this at 4 1/4. And again, check out my blog. The link is in the description below for both the metric and the imperial measurements. So I'm going to score this, and then I'm going to rotate it and cut it in half. So this is a full sheet of cardstock. So imperial, I've scored it at 4 1/4 on the short side. For metric, that would be scored at 10.5 centimeters. And then I'm going to cut it in half on the long side. For imperial, that's 5.5. And my metric, folks, that would be 14.9. And then you have 2 card bases that you, for your, to make this card for this stationery pack. Now, again, since I've made one, I am only making one right now. That's my card base. And then the front of it, I've used the shimmer paper, and I don't know if you can see that it has a beautiful sparkle to it. So this is going to be what we stamp on the front. And I'm going to cut it at 5 1/4 on the long side, and then rotate it and cut it at 4 inches on the short side. So this is the front. If you're making 2, you would cut this again, and you would have 2 card fronts. And I like to put a piece of white cardstock in the inside. So this is going to be cut at the same dimensions as the front. 5 1/4 by 4, or 10 centimeters by 14.4 centimeters. And again, you could cut the second piece and you would be able to make 2 cards. So that's all the cutting for this project. And now we're going to stamp on our card front, the shimmer paper. The first thing I'm going to do is stamp my sentiment. So I want to make sure I have enough area before I stamp my flowers. I'm using the inspired thoughts, and I want to use the sending healing thoughts your way, because this is going to be a get well card. Now that stamp has not been, I have not put the images on it. I was going to show you how to do that. So if you look at this way, it's sending healing thoughts, and it's this stamp right here. So let me show you how to put your image on. You want to remove the covering from the back of your stamp, and you want to remove from the image the covering from that. So now both covering from the sticky image and the covering from the foam, the stamp. And then you're going to line it up against the outline that is left. And then just place your stamp down slowly, and then you can lift up, and there it is perfectly centered to the clean image. And I can bring in my block and pick it up. Now we're ready to stamp. And I'll be stamping with Memento black ink. And I want this image on the top right-hand side. It's about there. Perfect. So I'm using this larger image, which will be the lighter color, and then these highlighted, which will have a darker. And I'll be using the leaf and stem image and this smaller flower image. So the first color I'm stamping with is Highland Heather, and that matches our card base. Now this flower I'm using the same ink to create the flower, whereas last time, the previous card, I used a darker ink for the highlights. This one, I'm using the same ink, and because I'll be stamping it twice, it'll become darker on top of the highlighted area. Bring in a scrap paper because I like to keep my stamp area pristine, and by having scrap paper behind it, I can do that. So I'm going to ink with Highland Heather. I'm going to do my stamp in this direction. And while I have the ink out, I'll stamp my smaller flower. And that's going to go down here in the corner. And with the image that has the background for the larger flower, I'm going to ink that up, and then I'll line it up again using the left bottom and the top flower. And then I'm moving it till I feel like it's all lined up. So you can see where even though I've used the same ink, because it lays on top, it creates a darker outline. So you can use the same ink pad multiple times to get that layered look. Stamping, this is one down here, where the background is Blushing Bride and the highlights are Flirty Flamingo. So I've cleaned my stamps using my chamois off to the side. And even though they're stained, it's not bringing the ink on. So I'll start with my darker ink first. I'll ink up my stamp. And this flower is going to be, I want to make sure I leave room for this smaller one here. So I'll put this one, I think right about here. And then I'll stamp the background with Blushing Bride. Again, I've cleaned my ink with my chamois. I'll ink it up with the Blushing Bride and then align my stamp as I told you. And then it lines up. So this bigger flower on the center right, I'm using crushed curry for the darker part and the Daffodil Delight for the background, light background. I'm going to stamp with crushed curry. And I'm going to turn this one a little bit to the right, tilt it a little bit to the right. It's my background image. And then with Daffodil Delight, that background color. Go. The last flower will be a Mango Melody. And this one, I'm going to put right here between these two. Maybe a little bit, right about there. So I'm going to create a mask by stamping the larger floral image on a sticky note that has adhesive on this side. Ink my stamp up. It doesn't really matter what color, but I do want to get some of that sticky, so I'm going to do it on this side where the sticky is. And then I'm also going to stamp my smaller image. I do want to also make one of those. And then with my paper snips, I'll just trim very closely to the stamped image. And this will mask the flower as I'm stamping my stems and leaves. So I'm just trying to get rather close to the stamped image to create a mask. I'm keeping my scissors going in one direction, and then I'm steering the paper with my left hand. And that really is more efficient than trying to move your scissor blades. And then I'll do the same for this stamped image. And that can cover that one. Perfect. Here's my flower, my stem and leaf image, and I'll be stamping with Old Olive. And here you can see I did full strength on these two, and then these I stamped off. So I will be stamping off just to give, again, some interest. So I'll cover this stamped image, and I'll cover this one, ink my leaf. Trying to avoid stamping on the sentiment or this pink. So that looks good. There we go. I did get some on that pink, but I think that's going to be okay. And now for the next one, I want to stamp, I think we'll just go counterclockwise. So I want to stamp a stem for this Mango Melody. I'm going to stamp off and then place my stamp, my stem right about there. And then I'm not going to need these as I stamp the bottom. I'll do full strength for this one. And this one I've already stamped off, so I will just leave stamped. Just without re-inking, I'll stamp that leaf. And then the final one, I'm going to stamp the Daffodil Delight. So I'll cover up my floral image and just stamp. And this is going to come down, so I'm going to cover this up. And that way, when I stamp it, it's not going to affect this leaf. This one's going to be full strength too. So I've got everything covered. Here we go. Put this down. There we go. Now I can confidently stamp without worrying I'm going to be stamping on one of my other flowers. Now let me move the masks. Here we go. So now a card front is completed. I did stamp on the inside of this card, and I'll stamp the same image on this piece of. With my Old Olive, I'm going to bring in my leaf and stem. I'm going to stamp off on that. And then here in the stamp in the corner, the bottom left corner. And then with my flower, the Highland Heather ink and the smaller stamp. This will match the card base. And this card is ready to be assembled. Take my card base and fold it in half on my score line. I'm going to burnish that score line. Then with my liquid glue, I'm going to adhere my inside piece. Those colors just look so wonderful against that Highland Heather card base. And then my card front with my shimmery flowers. Some liquid glue on this one too. And adhere my card front. And then the last part, I'm going to add some rhinestones. These are the basic jewels. I'm using these small ones. I pick a tool. I'm going to put one there. Oops. One down here. And then the final one over here next to this, kind of fill in this spot. And that makes a triangle nice. Draw your eye down. So that's my second card. So I have a happy birthday, I have a healing thoughts, a thank you, and with heartfelt sympathy. And the only thing we need now is some envelopes. So I'm going to recreate this flower for my envelopes. I'll be using Pear Pizzazz for my leaf and stem, Pale Papaya for the background, and the Calypso Coral for the highlights. For my leaf image, I'll put that on the bottom left of my envelopes. My highlights with Calypso Coral. And then the solid image, the lighter color, Pale Papaya. So now I have 4 envelopes for my 4 cards. So now I want to create a storage option for this set of cards. I'm using an acetate card box. There's my acetate card box. I'm going to stamp a focal point on this white piece of cardstock, and then I'm going to layer Pale Papaya on some Pear Pizzazz for the label. I'll again be using the DSP from the Expressions and Ink to create a belly band for my acetate box. Using my paper trimmer, I'm going to cut my white cardstock 3 inches by 2 1/4. And this is going to be my focal piece. Then I'm going to layer it on a piece of Pale Papaya. So I'm going to cut this at 2 3/8 by 3 1/8. And then the next layer will be with Pear Pizzazz, and that's going to be 3 1/4 by 2 1/2. And then with my Expressions and Ink DSP, I'm going to cut 1 3/4 by 12 inches. And this is going to be my belly band for my acetate box. For my focal point on my belly band, I'm going to be using this stamped image on the front. So I'm doing the same flower that I did for the envelopes, where I used the background as the Pale Papaya, the darker highlights with Calypso Coral, and the leaves and stem from Pear Pizzazz. But I'll be doing this a little bit different than I've done the previous images. So since this is all on one stamp, I'm going to be using daubers to place the ink on the stamped image. So the first thing I'm going to be using is my Pale Papaya, and I have my dauber here that I use for my orange family. So ink this up, and then I'm just going to dab the ink directly on the flower part of this stamp, making sure I'm covering them very well with pale papaya. And even these little puffy flowers over here, these little tiny ones, I'm also making sure that I daub them so they get pale papaya too. Then with my darker Calypso Coral, I'm just going around the edges now of my stamp, just to bring a little bit of that darker image to the edges. Just kind of kissing them with that little bit of Calypso Coral. Now for the stems, Pear Pizzazz, and I'll be using my dauber that I use for my greens. Dab, make sure I get the stem and up here to where these little puffy flowers are. I'm just trying to keep the ink just on the stem and not into my bigger flower. And now I'm going to breathe on, huff on my stamp to make sure that if any ink is dry, that it comes back to life. And I'm going to tilt this at an angle so I can get all the stamp image. I'm going to bring it up a little bit so I can put my greeting on there. There we go. It's beautiful colors. Now I did want to bring in the sweet strawberry stamp, the Just For You. I'm going to stamp my Just For You on the lower right-hand corner with my Memento black ink. So let me ink this up, and I'll place that right down here in the corner. Perfect. Now I'm going to assemble my layers. Put some liquid glue here. And that fits right on top of the pale papaya layer. Just a very narrow border. And this layer goes on the Pear Pizzazz. A lot of P's. So Pear Pizzazz. And that also has a very narrow border. So now we're ready to assemble our acetate box. So it's already pre-scored. So I'm just going to fold on these score lines. And then fold the flaps. I find if you fold them back and then fold them in, it's helpful. Set this aside. So we have our 4 cards in our stationery set here. And our 4 envelopes. I'm going to put the envelopes the other way and bring one of these multi flowers out front and slide these inside before I put the belly band, just to give it a little stability. So it looks very pretty on the back and in the front. Again, I'll fold my flaps out and then fold them in. Now I've decided that I'm going to use the opposite side of this DSP. I know it's beautiful gold flecks, but we are going to cover them up. So I'll place that roughly in the middle and fold this up, fold this over and line the edges. I'm going to just kind of gently crease all four corners or those, and then pinch them. And if I make sure when I'm pinching them that it lines up, I'll keep it square. And the final one. This will overlap. We'll just glue these down. And you can put some glue dot on the belly band if you like. And then this way, I'm going to put my focal piece here. And the last thing I wanted to add was I love this gold shimmer ribbon. I think it's just such a nice accent. So I'm going to glue my belly band together. Put some glue on this end. And I'll put some glue on this edge. And then some glue right here in the center. Now to hold this nice and tight. Now it's just glued to itself, but it will slide around. So if you don't want it to slide around, you can stick a glue dot underneath to hold it in place. Take approximately 16 inches of this gold shimmer ribbon, and I like to cut off the bolt so I don't waste it. And I'm just going to tie a knot on the left-hand side. And then snip with my snips. I'm going to use my dimensionals to adhere this. So I'm going to just place it over top of the belly band upside down so I know where to put my dimensionals. Remove my dimensional covers. And then place my focal piece on my belly band. And then we have our acetate box with 4 cards that you can give as a gift or store for yourself. And it looks even nice from the back. Thank you so much for joining me on this vlog. Remember to like and subscribe my channel so I can bring you even more fun projects. Hop to the next participant so you can get more ideas for stationery or storage. Until next time, remember, stamping is fun. Bye.